Let's say you have a 2-year-old, and you're the parent of a 2-year-old, and they get angry with you. Now, incidentally, if your 2-year-old doesn't get angry with you, you're not doing your job. Because she can't have that second cookie before dinner. And why should she not be upset? I mean, when you want something, you don't get it, you get frustrated. Right? She gets frustrated, so But what if you grew up in a home where your father, or mother, was a rageaholic, and so that you're terrified of anger? You can't handle it. It brings up too much anxiety for you. So then you give the signal, overtly or covertly, that good little girls don't get angry. What the child gets is that little girls who get angry don't get loved. So then how does she adapt? She adapts by repressing her anger. That's the way she maintains the relationship with you. Because the fundamental dynamic in human life and the most important factor in the development and existence of human beings is attachment, connection to another human being. As infants, we're utterly helpless, and we're more helpless than any other creature, and stay that way longer than any other creature. So without that attachment relationship, we simply don't function, can't live. It's life essential. And throughout life, of course, we evolved as a species of attachment. By attachment meaning it's a gravitational force that pulls two bodies together, just like you can really say that love makes the world go round, because love is the common word for attachment, connection, where somebody's taking care of somebody else, somebody's holding somebody else, and somebody's being held. Now, gravitation itself is an attachment force. I'm talking about physical gravitation. It pulls two bodies together. And literally, it's gravitation that makes the world go around the sun, isn't it? So when they say love makes the world go round, it's true in the purest physical sense. Well, it's also true in the psychological realm. So when the love, and by love here, I don't mean the emotion that a parent feels towards the child, because I take it for granted that all parents love their kids. And even the hard as it is to fathom, but even the parents who abuse their kids love their kids. They just don't know how else to love them, because they're acting out their own childhood programming. So by love here, in this case, I don't mean the emotion. I mean the capacity to be present with and understand and see the other human being for exactly who they are, and to accept them for who they are, and to invite them unconditionally to be in your presence exactly the way they are. That's what love actually is. And so I can tell you as a parent, I was completely incapable of giving that to my kids, because I was still dealing with my own childhood stuff as an adult. Well, when children don't receive that unconditional, what Carl Rogers called the unconditional positive regard, or the unconditional invitation to be in my presence exactly the way you are, then they have to adapt to that. Why do they have to adapt? Because they need the attachment relationship, without which they can't survive. So without attachment, there's no survival. Therefore, we adapt. And if your child at age 2 gets the message that she's not invited to be in your presence when she's angry, then she won't be angry. Not that the anger won't be there, but she'll repress it. It's not a conscious behavior, it's simply an automatic brain mechanism. Now, when you repress anger, you know what happens in the long term? You're repressing your immune system. Lots of studies have shown that. And the immune system can then fail to function, or it can actually turn against you in the form of autoimmune illness. And that's, in a nutshell, the source of a lot of physical illnesses. Not the only source, but it's a major contributing factor that's utterly ignored in Western medicine, despite reams of evidence. And that's the subject of my book, When the Body Says No. But the first book I wrote, so what I'm saying here is that when there's a loss emotionally, that translates into biology. So it's not that there's biology here and no emotions here. It's that the emotions and the biology are completely inseparable. And what happens on the emotional plane inevitably will have its manifestations on a biological plane. So what you lose emotionally translates into biological events in your body. And that begins with brain development. Now I began to be interested in brain development when I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was 53, I think, 54, 53. And it was a typical self-diagnosis. Somebody I knew told me she's just been diagnosed and she has to have coffee with me. And 5 minutes into the conversation, I knew why it was with me that she has to have coffee. Because everything she said about herself, the distractibility, the poor impulse control, inability to stay on task unless I was highly motivated, the hyper-focusing to the exclusion of other information when I was highly motivated, my addictive patterns, as I said in my book, my Jekyll and Hyde ways of being with my kids. All this I thought was explained. It certainly was reflected in the description of the ADD persona. Within a couple of months, 2 of my kids were diagnosed, which seemed to go along with the mainstream medical view that what we've got here is a genetic disorder, which I never bought into for a minute. And why didn't I buy into it? Because although I didn't know anything about the brain or how it developed, I knew something. The tuning out, the absent-mindedness that characterizes ADD is not a disease, inherited or otherwise. What is tuning out? What is it? Anybody?
An adaptive response.
Sorry?
An adaptive response.
It's an adaptive response to?
Stress.
To stress. So that if I were to stress you right now, but I mean though that is to be verbally abusive, emotionally insulting, domineering, you would go into a stress state. And how could you deal with it? Well, you could just walk out the door. Or you could stand up and say, you can't talk to me like that, I will not accept it. And if you couldn't walk out, nor did you have the strength to confront me, to fight back, if flight or fight wasn't available to you, there's still a third thing you could do. There are, 100, 200 people here in the room with you, you could ask for help. But what if you couldn't do any of those things? Then how would you handle the stress? Well, you wouldn't. Your brain would handle it by a number of defense mechanisms, the salient of which would be dissociation. You dissociate, all of a sudden you're not here. Now you're not suffering as much. So it's simply a coping response is all it is. So that's what I knew. Now let me read you a quote from an article in the Journal of Pediatrics that was published in 2012. And it's from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. And the article was entitled, An Integrated Scientific Framework for Understanding Child Development. And here's what they say. Now this article brings together a lot of the research on child development and stress. And here's the a salient paragraph. They say, growing scientific evidence, excuse me, demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity, stress, or instability can lead to short-term physiologic and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost in long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, the way we adapt to early stress helps us endure that difficult period in the life of the helpless child, but those same adaptations become source of pathology, threaten your health, threaten the length, your longevity even. So what's adaptive in one situation, what's meant to be a temporary state becomes a long-term trait. And when it goes from state to a trait, now it's a source of dysfunction and pathology.